Hey everyone, welcome to another reaction video. In this video, we're covering an interview that was done by Piers with the Qatari World Cup boss, Hassan Al-Tawabi. With that being said, let's jump right into it. Listen to what he has to say and the conversation that they had, which I think is quite interesting. But yeah, let's go.
Qatar is not without fault. Women's rights and gay rights are restricted by Western standards. Migrant workers have indisputably been treated badly. But those statements apply to many of the countries around the world, including many competing in this tournament, and by many nations who've hosted major sporting events without anything like the furore that's kicked off about Qatar.
I would have to agree with that. There's been a very heavy-handed approach to the coverage, the media coverage regarding Qatar and them hosting the World Cup as of very recent. So it's quite interesting. Says a lot about those that are criticizing Qatar, but yeah, which, don't get me wrong, they do deserve some criticism, but there's constructive criticism and then there's just criticism for criticism's sake.
We seem to have forgotten in England that in 1966, when we hosted and won the World Cup, it was illegal to be gay in our country.
True.
Moral halos appear to have slipped over some people's eyes and obscured some rather salient facts. For example, there's 12% of the population here are native Qataris, something we in the supposedly sophisticated West would never tolerate. The migrants who come here in vast numbers are sometimes mistreated. But the reason they're here in the first place is because the wages they earn are life-changing. And the global scrutiny of the World Cup has at least led to reforms in labour laws here. That will be an important legacy, and one massively lacking after 2 Olympic Games in China and a World Cup in Russia.
Hey, facts. That is so true. It's actually regressed in countries like China and Russia. Currently right now, as we're speaking, there's massive demonstration regarding COVID restriction in China. Like, they even had a BBC reporter that was literally beaten up by by police and stuff like that in China. We had people demonstrating. We had people being locked down in places, lockdowns in workplaces and stuff like that, and literally restricting people's rights. But there isn't really that heavy-handed criticism of China or even Russia that's currently invading Ukraine and stuff like that. So,
Qatar is also a significant investor in many aspects of UK life. For example, it gives us 25% of our gas, which is food for thought, isn't it? As our national...
we don't want a cold winter. Winter's cold already. We want that gas. That's what the British government wants, that gas.
Grid considers winter blackouts. Would all the virtue signallers back home prefer we tell Qatar to stop sending its gas?
Nope.
This tournament's brought the football-mad Middle East together as well. 2 years ago, Qatar was under a blockade led by Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and the UAE. Now fans from most countries are pouring in to enjoy the football. Saudi's Crown Prince was at the opening ceremony. The Emir...
Not a fan of the Crown Prince, because we know he had a hand in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which was a reporter. So yeah, he isn't. He's got blood in his hands. So I'm not a fan of him. But let's listen to what they have to say.
Of Qatar even waved a Saudi flag during their stunning win over Messi's Argentina. There's no denying the Middle East has a long way to go on human rights and many social issues, but so frankly do a lot of European countries.
True.
There's also no denying that this region, the Middle East, has long deserved its World Cup. And there's no denying, and I can tell you, this is what most people here are thinking, that right now Qatar's putting on a pretty good show. And frankly, when it comes to morality, are we in England really in any position to lecture the Middle East about laws or values, given the way we illegally invaded Iraq 20 years ago, sparking 2 decades of ISIS terror?
Facts.
And at last year's Euros final, showed the world that we're a bunch of coke-snorting, booze-sodden, brawling, firework exploding from backside imbeciles.
Facts. Because as we know, the West, the US, and other Western and other European countries were responsible for the destabilization of the Middle East by invading Iraq, destabilizing the whole region, and continuing with the destabilization of that region to today. So we can't on one hand say, oh, you guys are barbaric, and then on the other hand, be culpable and be responsible for the destabilization of the region. We just can't have it both ways.
Methinks not. Well, Hassan Al-Thawadi is the Secretary General of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, which is a fancy title for he pretty well runs the World Cup here in Qatar. He's the man at the helm of the most controversial tournament in World Cup history for reasons that frankly baffle me. And he spoke to me a little earlier today. I began by asking how he felt about Qatar hosting the tournament and how he thought it was going.
We're immensely proud of the World Cup, as you know, and everything that's been unfolded since the 20th of November. It's a moment of great pride. I mean, you know, just if you look at what's happening on the streets, people from all over the world coming in, celebrating. The stories unfolding in the pitch, in the stadiums. From a footballing perspective, phenomenal, great.
Well, Saudi Arabia beating Argentina.
Saudi Arabia beating
really
Argentina.
set the tone for the region,
Absolutely,
right?
well, absolutely. I mean, you know, and then Morocco just recently beating Belgium yesterday.
Big.
I mean, that in itself is a phenomenal story as well. This is the first World Cup in the Arab world. This is the first World Cup in the Middle East, in the Islamic world. You see it not only in terms of the teams participating, but you see it in the stadiums. I mean, I was seeing some of the punditry where you had the fans. It was predominantly red Moroccan supporters. And it's not just Moroccans flying over here. It's supporters of the Moroccan national team from the Arab population, living in Qatar, visiting Qatar, Saudi supporters who are supporting Morocco, Moroccan supporters who are supporting Saudi and Tunisia and so on. You know, for our part of the world, for our region, this is a, you know, I have to say, you know, as Qataris, as Arabs, we're extremely proud of this moment.
How have you reacted as a senior Qatari, one of the real key people in this World Cup, particularly from the criticism from the...
All right, we're about to jump into the juicy, because this is how I like interviews being kind of phrased. I mean, set it up nicely and then you jump into the meat and potato of the actual discussion. And Piers is good as this, so yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Piers, and I mean, I've had things I've had to say about him in the past, and some of the interviews he's done in the past and his heavy-handedness and stuff like that. But I can appreciate a conversation of this level.
UK, for example.
I think, you know, from day one, what we tried to do is distinguish between two forms of criticism. There's constructive criticism that we've taken on board. We've engaged with, we've talked to our critics who had a genuine interest in terms of you know, progress or working with us towards utilizing this tournament as a transformational vehicle for Qatar and for the region. And as I said, we've engaged with them, we've discussed things with them, and they've become partners in the end. And then there's, of course, criticism that I think is based on misinformation, misrepresented facts, misstated facts, and even towards, you know, these, whether it's media outlets or individuals, we've also reached out and tried to engage and tried to set the facts straight. And some, unfortunately, have not been as receptive of our efforts. But nevertheless, we've always said one thing: the most important element is our response is always going to be by actions, as opposed to words.
Well, Gary Lineker, who fronts the BBC coverage, he's a friend of mine, full disclosure, big fan of...
This has been a bit touchy, this whole part they're about to dive into right now, because I think they're about to talk about the whole Gary Lineker stuff, which they've kind of mentioned.
His work over the years, both on the pitch and off. But he did a sort of monologue at the start of the BBC's coverage, pointing out all the bad things about Qatar. And all I felt was he didn't do that at the Russia World Cup.
No.
They didn't run your opening ceremony this time, the BBC on the main channel. They did in Russia. They ran it, for example, with the China Olympics, the Beijing Winter Olympics.
Yes.
It seems to me to be a bit of a double standard there.
Well, it's
This is the truth right now when it comes to the BBC. The BBC is meant to be neutral. The BBC as a broadcasting entity is meant to be neutral. And as of recent, we've seen the BBC take a very, very heavy stance on various sides of a debate, which defeats the whole purpose of you being an entity that's meant to be, I mean, neutral, impartial, listen to both sides, put out the facts, put out the information that people deserve. But what you've seen of recent, and I've kind of highlighted it here, we did not see them go hard when it came to China. We did not see them go hard when it came to Russia. Why is that the case?
It's disappointing, you know, for an institution such as the BBC, especially, you know, in particular BBC Sports, you know, an institution that is always known, or at least, you know, as I grew up, was always known to be, you know, objective in stating the facts and allowing for, you know, different points of view to be addressed and for the audience to make their own decision. For the actions that you've mentioned, for example, you know, and again, in particular with Gary, the frustration is that we've reached out to him. We've reached out to him many times. The latest, if I'm not mistaken, was in February, about 3 or 4 times, for a sit down. And at the very least, again, with the idea, we'll present our case. Whatever judgment you want to pass later on, that's up to you. But at least for us to present the counter argument, show what we've done, how we've utilized this tournament, and how really this tournament is an historical event. What you see in the stadiums, what you see outside, the engagement, the cultural engagement, the fans, the way people are dressing.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's quite interesting that they reached out to Gary to have a conversation. And this is coming from him. This is coming from Hassan. And if that's true, then we need to know a bit more information, because what we've only heard about is just the side of Gary, but not the other side as to he was approached of some sort, or what has been the dialogue that's been happening in the back. We are not privy to that. So all we hear is just what we're being told. But it's interesting to hear somebody else's opinion about it. So, yeah.
I mean, just a little side story. Over the years, as I did a lot of interviews, especially from back home, I'm always dressed like this. And a lot of my friends, whether they're journalists and even some experts, always try to convince me to dress in a Western way. Even if I'm in Qatar, dress in a Western way.
Why should we force on you anything, frankly? Whether it's our values that we have in the UK, the way we dress, the way we talk, the way we drink.
Yes.
I'm not sure that we're in any position to take the high moral ground as a country which, for example, invaded Iraq illegally in 2003, an invasion I opposed as a newspaper editor. Does that give us bragging rights on morality with the Middle East? I'm not sure that it does. I do want to turn to some things where I think I would say I have a criticism. Notably migrant workers. The Guardian newspaper said that 6,500 migrant workers have died as a result of the World.
I actually covered this on my podcast, and I've covered it of recent. I've had discussions with people of this regarding this number of 6,000 plus migrant workers have died. I've seen it reported in various places, and for me, the language in around the reporting has always been very, very vague. And so I've always kind of questioned that number, even though that number has just been the only one that we've heard about. I've always questioned the number, but now we get to hear from this question. Hopefully, we get to hear what the side of the figures are.
World Cup construction. I've looked into this, as have many other fact checkers. That figure is deeply misleading because it's actually the number of migrants who've died in total in the last 12 years since the bid was confirmed for Qatar.
No. If that is true, then that's fucked up. Because that would be like saying, oh, the UK is hosting the next World Cup, and every death that's happened since we got the bid for the next World Cup is all due to us hosting the World Cup. Every death that's happened in the UK from us getting the getting the bid to actually hosting the World Cup, we are responsible for that because of the World Cup. That would never be the case.
Of any cause. Do you know how many migrant workers have died as a result of any construction since the announcement of the bid?
In terms of what we did from day one, at least within the organization that I'm responsible for, is we were committed towards being transparent and capturing any incidents, whether it's in terms of misses, near misses, accidents, or unfortunately deaths. And we decided to capture, and we made a decision in terms of obviously work-related deaths as defined under the industry standard, but also capturing what we consider to be non-work-related deaths. And this is only purely in relation to the stadiums and the projects that we're responsible for.
And what are those totals?
And that's 3 work-related deaths and 37 non-work-related deaths.
Right. These are deaths specific to World Cup construction, the stadiums,
specific to World Cup stadiums.
Do you know how many people have died in Qatar since you won the bid in the last 12 years from any construction related to anything to do with the World Cup? In other words, new hotels, new bridges, whatever. In other words, what is the honest, realistic total, do you think, of migrant workers who've died as a result of what they're doing for the World Cup in totality?
The estimate is around 400. Between 400 and 500. I don't.
Wait. Between 400 to 500, and then you have 6,000, 6,500. That is a massive difference. That is a massive difference. Now that's crazy, yo. What? Nah, that's crazy.
I don't have the exact number. That's something that's being discussed.
I mean, there will be people, Hassan, who say that's a lot of people.
One death is too many, Piers.
But they would say 400 is
agree.
a price too big to pay. What do you say to that?
What I will say is, one death is a death too many, plain and simple.
agree.
And I think every year, the health and safety standards on the sites are improving, at least on our sites, the World Cup sites, the ones that we're responsible for, most definitely, to the extent that you've got trade unions, representatives of the German trade union, representatives of the Swiss trade
But
union.
do you accept?
Have just to make this point, have commended the work that's been done on the site, on the World Cup sites, and the improvement.
Right, but do you accept then, because of the improvements that have been made, that at the start they weren't good enough?
Valid
The
question.
standards?
I think overall, the need for labor reform in itself dictates that yes, improvements had to happen. And just so we're clear, this was something that was recognized before we bid. The improvements that have happened isn't because of the World Cup. These are improvements that we knew we had to do because of our own values. Improvements that had to happen, whether it's in terms of health and safety standards, whether it's in terms of improving the accommodation standards, whether it's in terms of dismantling the kafala system. Now what the World Cup did, the World Cup served as a vehicle, as an accelerant, as a catalyst. It, because of the spotlight, which we recognized early on was going to be shed, it allowed, it caused a lot of these initiatives, not only in terms of improvement in the legislation, but in the enforcement of it as well. And
I mean, his response, sort of there, but I'm always going to be, I'm quite skeptical of his response or the response that come from the official mouthpiece of the Qatari government, simply because it's like, everyone, PR and all that kind of stuff kicks in, and trying to save face and all that, but it does show a very, very stark difference in the number of 400 to 500 people that have died in relation to the building of the World Cup and stuffs around the World Cup, and then we have 6,500. So that's a massive difference. They could be fudging the numbers a little bit. I don't really know, but that's why I'm always going to be quite skeptical. But that is still though a massive difference in number.
And that's where today, where we we got to a position where our most ardent of critics consider us today to be a benchmark in the region.
Let me ask you about LGBT rights, because there's been a lot of furore about this, and in particular the wearing of the armband. So the England captain Harry Kane and several other European country captains were all going to wear the One Love armband. Did you personally have any problem with them doing that?
If it was done specifically to address Qatar, I had a problem with it.
Right.
If it was done if it was something that was going to be done, and the European nations were going to be holding, just wearing it continuously and constantly, then of course that's a decision that they, that's up to them.
I can't fault that response. That is a valid response. It's why are you gonna cherry pick when you want to stand up for LGBTQ plus rights? If you're gonna stand on it all the way through. Don't cherry pick when you're gonna do so. This did feel like a little bit of cherry picking as to, we are gonna do this because we are going to Qatar to go to for the World Cup. It just felt like that. If you are gonna be a hardened supporter and LGBT for the LGBTQ plus, then say no. I'm not gonna go. I'm gonna stand my ground. But
was FIFA right to say if they wear it, they'd all get bookings?
Again, it's a decision that FIFA's made between them and the European nations, and I think it became a standoff, and that was a discussion that was between them. For me, what I'm trying to what for our position and my personal position is, look, we've always said everybody's welcome, and we've worked very hard to create an environment and to ensure that people from all parts of the world and all walks of life come into Qatar, engage and interact with people from the Arab world and the Middle East. Even though we might not necessarily see eye to eye on certain things, even though we might not agree on certain things, but everybody's welcome. And the point is, to come to terms with the fact that we won't see eye to eye, but we can still have mutual respect for each other and still find a way of moving forward, celebrating together. And I think...
Is it safe for gay people to be in Qatar now?
It's safe for everybody to be in Qatar. Yes. Unequivocally, Piers, yes.
And safe for gay people to live in Qatar?
Yes. I think it's safe for everybody to live in Qatar, Piers.
But there would be a problem if a gay couple, for example, showed demonstrative displays of
public display of affection generally is not part of our culture.
I've heard this said a lot of times, so this isn't new. This isn't new to me. I've heard this said a lot of times. I've had friends that have said this to me even while I was like in my late teens, my early 20s, when I was in uni as well. I've had this same stuff said to me about, public show of affection and stuff like that. Especially in the Middle East country, isn't really the case. So, yeah, it's nothing new.
Public display of affection is not part of our culture. It's not, regardless of who you are, regardless of your sexual identification or and so on, public display of affection is not. And again, I say that, and I mean within reason. Holding hands in the streets is fine.
For gay people?
Holding hands in the streets for anybody is fine.
It is?
But what I'm saying is, there's public intimacy. Public intimacy is not part of our culture. We're a relatively conservative culture. In the West, the individual's personal rights always trump, let's say, the community rights. That's what's most sacred. Now there are other societies, our society being one of them. The Arab world and the Middle East, where it's the communal values, it's the values of the community and society, which is also, again, fundamentally related to religion.
And this is not just the Arab world as well, or the Middle East and stuff like that. This is also, you find this in Asia, you find this in Africa as well. That whereby communal rights are supersede individual rights. So it's nothing new. And I think this is where it always comes down to whenever you're gonna go to someone else's region, someone else, some other place, some other country and stuff like that, you have to be aware of how their lives are, and how things are constructed, how society is kind of constructed, how individualism is kind of constructed, and then just try to adhere to their standards
as well. That is of a higher value, of higher importance. And again, the question then becomes, what is more important? If you're coming from a Western value-based system, you look at individual rights, regardless of any other aspect that should always be sacred. And from our part of the world, it's the religious values that are there. What I'm trying to say is, at points in time, these discussions, to try to find a winner out of them, or try to find, for somebody to kind of defeat somebody else in terms of the discussions, the reality is that there will be no winner. But what we have to do is find, or at least that's what we try to do, is find common ground. Find something at least that unites us. And come to terms with the fact that we might not see eye to eye on certain things, but we have to find a way of coexisting and moving forward.
True.
And what this World Cup has showcased, again, taking it back to what you see on the streets, taking it back to where you see the engagement, taking it back to where you're seeing, the Brazilian and the Saudi singing "Where's Messi" after the loss after the defeat of Argentina, seeing the Argentinians coming in, finding the Saudis and saying "Where's Salem" when they lost against Poland, looking at people dressing like I've seen somebody dressing, wearing the thobe, but in the Portuguese flag. I've seen the Croatian flag. I saw a tweet yesterday that for me was just absolutely funny. A guy saying, never in my life was I expecting to see a Spaniard rushing because he's late to watch the Spanish match, holding onto his headgear.
This is what we would expect if we were hosting a World Cup in the UK, around Europe, in America and stuff like that. You want people to kind of integrate, be part and parcel of the way things are done, just like celebrate. Even though we might not agree with everything, but find common grounds and find ways whereby we can coexist in that short period of time. And as part of that coexistence, you can share culture, you can share ideas, you can have conversations. The last thing you want to do is shut down conversations even before they actually happen. What's happening outside is a celebration of cultures.
I want to end on a positive. It's been a positive interview. Who's going to win the World Cup?
Oof.
I don't know.
Give me a name. I need a name. Stick your neck out. I'll play this back in 3 weeks.
I'll say France.
Oh,
France.
God.
I think France.
Led by Mbappe.
Mbappe, not
and
bad.
the French team,
I'm not really a big football guy. I rarely ever watch football. But it'll be interesting to see who wins. England might have a chance.
Actually, I think England have a good chance.
England have got a great chance.
If Harry Kane remains fit and they play Foden. But I also think Portugal have a chance with my friend Cristiano.
Well, of course.
Because I think he's got a vision of himself lifting that cup, and they have a very good side.
Well, just to be fair as well, for me, I want England to win. Just so we're clear. I do want England to win. It'd be great to have, English football history connected to Qatar forever.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
You know what? That was a really good interview. I think for me, this is the kind of discussions that we need to happen. And Piers is definitely kind of like adjusted his style, and I mean, that's definitely kind of evolved a little bit since his whole spat on say ITV, Good Morning Britain and stuff like that. His heavy-handedness when it comes to interviews definitely kind of adjusted his style slightly, enough for it to kind of accommodate conversations. Because these are the kind of conversations and this kind of dialogues that we need at such a high level, because this is the way you kind of create change. But nah, hope you guys enjoyed the video as well. I really did enjoy this. And yeah, on to the next one. Peace out.